We've just seen a wonderful performance of Clara Barton by Ann Jung. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I was very excited to be part of Chautauqua. This is my first one.
Oh, okay. Now, why do you think Clara Barton became so shy? Did you find that in your research? Did they talk about why she was so shy?
Well, it's obvious that she was shy at such an early age that it was almost genetic. Obviously, she was shy even at 2 and 3. And never quite got over that her entire life. Even when she, boldly went out in the middle of battlefields and dodged bullets, she still maintained a level of shyness. So obviously it was there. I mean, it's not something she developed. It was clearly there from the time she was a child.
Wasn't a traumatic experience or anything?
No, not that we know of. Although in her autobiography she said, when I think of my childhood, I think of nothing but fear. But there was no real reason for that. I mean, she had very loving brothers and sisters, and so it just seemed to be her personality from the outset.
Now, what drove her? She was so courageous in the face of so many obstacles, whether on the battlefield or being the first at so many things. What do you think drove her?
I believe a lot of that was inspired by her father. When she grew up and he told her all those military stories about how he had fought in the French and Indian Wars, he also instilled a very deep love of country and a very strong sense of you have a duty to that country. And she would say that frequently. When people said, how could you have done so many things in the midst of such carnage, such incredibly horrific scenes? And she said, nothing except the desire to help ameliorate some of that could have ever induced me to face the pestilent breath of war. So it's that incredibly strong sense of duty that we owe something to our nation other than just, ourselves and our families. So her father, Captain Stephen Barton, I think instilled that in her.
Now, I read that she nursed her brother who fell from a barn and was not expected to recover, but she did not give up, and she eventually nursed him back to health. Did you find that that sort of helped her in the nursing part of it? She was sort of used to seeing what it was like to help someone recover?
I certainly think it gave her the idea she could do something like that. That's a very famous story, which unfortunately there are so many famous stories in her life that I don't tell that one because I just only have so much time. But she was only 10 years old when this happened to her brother David. And so at a very young age she did. She said she hated leeches, but she forced herself to handle those great loathsome crawly creatures, as she called them. And the doctors pretty much gave up on him. He had fallen from the top of a roof during a barn raising, and he had developed a terrible fever. And the doctors were stumped. And they pretty much said, there's nothing else we can do. And Clara refused to accept that. And for 2 years of her life, and she was only 10 years old, this is an amazing thing in a personality so young, I think, she would not leave his bedside. She entertained him, she read to him, she handled the leeches, if it would make him feel better rather than the doctors if they did come out. So yeah, there are a lot of people who see that as a foreshadowing of her future bravery and ability to nurse. And I think certainly at that age she learned she could overcome that terrible shyness and fear of so many things when someone else's welfare was at stake.
In her writings, you said she wrote so much. When you were doing your initial research, when you began to study Clara Barton, what was it that was one of the first things that jumped out at you in her writing?
I think, again, the passion of how she spoke, whether it was her passion in favor of the Union cause or her passion and the way she despised slavery. I mean, everything is in very strong, dynamic terms. It's not, well, I kind of thought this or I thought that. So I think, when you read any of her quotes, you can't help, whether you agree with them or not, you can't help but admire the passion and how much she completely believed in what she was doing. So as I said, when I'm reading, the first time I read her biography, I just thought, I have to do something. I have to go help someone. I mean, here's this woman, look at all she did, and what am I doing? It makes you say, what am I doing with my life? So she just had such passion, and that's what you see in her writings over and over again.
In her character, is there something that you see as a personality trait that she has that you find that you have as a historian, as an actress?
I would never presume to compare myself to Clara Barton. She, of all the women I portray, and I portray some very fascinating ones, she's the greatest true heroine of all of the women. But I would like to at least think enthusiasm. Certainly I have that, and obviously she had that for whatever she wanted to do or get done. She had that energy and that enthusiasm, and that's what I try to convey. And hopefully I have that too. Certainly when I play her, I feel that energy.
How long did you study her before you first did a performance of her life?
I was about 6 months. It usually takes me about 3 to 5 months to research a show, to put the props together, to try to figure out, again, in a life, especially of this magnitude, how do you distill that down to 45 minutes? In a way, that's such a disservice. I hate to even, but on the other hand, the option is not doing it at all, and then nobody knows about her. So you have to pick what are the most dramatic and that have a theme to them. And so.
How long have you been involved with Chautauqua?
This is my very first year.
Is it?
And I have been just delighted. They couldn't have been more gracious. It's been very exciting. The bulk of my Clara Barton shows thus far have been for school children. And so the show obviously is watered down a little bit to make it not quite so scary. And I really loved when I went back to research this, and I did for Chautauqua, because I knew this was an adult audience. I knew I would have Civil War buffs who really know their history. And I also thought, this is great, because now I can really show some of that real passion and strength that Clara had, and some of the more dramatic things that I leave out for children. You don't want to overpower the children too much. So I got very excited about relearning some of the things I had forgotten from 8 years ago when I initially researched this.
I also read that in one account she was on a battlefield in the camp, and someone said that a soldier is calling out for his sister, and they brought her there to comfort because she was a woman. So
that's another very poignant story. And again, there are so many of these incredible stories that I just don't have time for. But yes, they said, you know, Miss Barton, would you come with us? One of the doctors said, we have a young boy who felt he was dying and who was crying and wanted his sister. And so they said, would you just come over here and try to comfort him? He needs a female face. So she went over and she gently lifted his head up and cradled him. And he looked up, and at first he really thought it was his sister, you know, in his delirium. And he said, oh, Mary, you've come to me. Now I can die happy because you have. And Clara couldn't quite bring herself to lie and say, yes, I'm married to him directly. But she let him think that, knowing that he was now content and seemed to be more restful. He actually lingered for a few more days. And actually the next morning when he woke up, some of the delirium was gone. And when he looked up, and she was still holding him. She had fallen asleep holding him, so he could rest. And when he woke up the next morning and he looked up and he said, you know, I knew you couldn't be my sister. I knew she couldn't be here, but thank you. And at that point, it was very clear to everyone that he was going to die very shortly. But Clara had already been very touched by him, and she went to the surgeon and said, get him on the train back to Washington. And the surgeon said, no, we only have room for people who are going to make it. He's going to die. And she pushed. And so he got one of the last spots on the train. He did get back to Washington, and he was in the hospital for 2 days before he died, but at least his family did get to him and saw him before he died. So these are just incredibly touching stories.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Chautauqua 2000, Maryland in the Civil War. From Montgomery College, I'm Angela Rice Beamer. Good night.